36 days, 4 tragedies, 2 countries. In the opening weeks of 2026, the Himalayas and Karakoram destroyed lives far beyond the summit. A military captain buried at 2 in the morning while clearing a strategic road. A veteran Sherpa killed on the descent from Makalu in winds exceeding 100 kilometers per hour. 9 members of one family gone, crushed inside their own home. A young Pakistani trainee dead on a practice climb. Soldiers, Sherpas, villagers, dreamers, the mountains took them all. What connected these deaths wasn't misfortune. It was a winter system that had been building for weeks, and the warnings were already written in the data. Snowfall in the Himalayas is tracked in centimeters, but in the winter of 2026, the numbers told a different story. Satellite data from MODIS and Sentinel-3 showed snow depths across the region, averaging 28 centimeters above the seasonal norm. In some places, the anomaly was even more extreme. The Burzil Pass sector registered a local spike of 62 centimeters, while Makalu's North Ridge gained 45 centimeters in just 24 hours. Lower valleys in Chitral saw a rapid rise of 38 centimeters over 3 days, setting the stage for disaster. Temperature readings from NASA's ARES instrument revealed a cold snap gripping the high-altitude core of the Himalaya and Karakoram. Across the 4,500 to 6,000 meter band, temperatures ran 2.4 degrees Celsius below average. On Makalu, the mercury dropped from -5 to -12 degrees in just 6 hours. That sudden freeze locked new snow into dense, unstable slabs, prime conditions for avalanches and slab collapses. Wind data completed the picture of a region under siege. ASCAT scatterometer readings captured jet stream winds topping 100 kilometers per hour over Makalu's ridges on January 11th, holding steady through the tragedy window. At Burzil and Chitral, surface winds averaged 68 kilometers per hour over 12 hours, enough to ground rescue helicopters and strand survivors. Even on training climbs, like the one at Shah Daulat, gusts reached 71 kilometers per hour, as confirmed by ECMWF reanalysis. These numbers are not just statistics, they are thresholds. The Pakistan Meteorological Department defines 65 kilometers per hour as the point where search and rescue flights are halted. The avalanche that struck Burzil Pass came after a record snow accumulation, with wind and cold conspiring to make any rescue nearly impossible. On Makalu, the combination of extreme wind and a sudden temperature drop led to equipment failure and delayed the summit push by 8 hours, exposing climbers to even greater risk. Behind every tragedy in January 2026 was a pattern visible from space. The snow was deeper, the cold more intense, the wind relentless. These extremes were not isolated, they were measured, mapped, and confirmed by the world's most advanced satellites. As the season unfolded, every data point became a warning, written in the language of snow, wind, and cold, for anyone willing to read it. Burzil Pass cuts a stark line across the high Karakoram, threading through a world of rock, ice, and shifting borders. This corridor, perched at 4,100 meters, sits just 25 kilometers north of the line of control, the de facto border between Pakistan and India. For centuries, caravans and armies have crossed here, but in winter, the pass becomes a lifeline drawn thin by snow and politics. Each year, the Pakistan Army deploys snow-clearing teams to keep Burzil open. The stakes are not just about access. The pass enables year-round supply to forward bases in Gilgit-Baltistan and supports the remote villages scattered along the spine of the mountains. When the snows come, these communities rely on a single road for food, fuel, and medicine. A blocked pass means isolation, and for the military, it threatens the readiness of units stationed along the frontier. The Burzil corridor is more than a road. It is a strategic artery for the entire northern border region. During the winter of 2026, record snowfalls transformed this route into a gauntlet. The Army's engineering units worked through the night, operating heavy machinery on slopes that can turn deadly with a single shift in temperature. Every meter cleared is a contest with nature, but also with time. A delay can strand convoys, cut off villages, or leave soldiers exposed to the elements. This struggle is not unique to Burzil. Across the Himalaya and Karakoram, military and civilian planners face the same collision of climate and geopolitics. The mountains do not recognize borders, but the consequences of a blocked pass ripple across both sides. In years of heavy snow, the risk of avalanches rises sharply. Satellite data and after-action reports confirm that rescue helicopters are grounded when surface winds exceed 65 kilometers per hour, a threshold reached repeatedly during January 2026. When that happens, there is no backup. Men and machines are left on their own until the storm passes or the snowpack stabilizes. The Burzil Pass is a case study in how climate extremes intersect with human infrastructure and national security. The 25-kilometer stretch between the pass and the LOC is not just a buffer zone, it is a zone of constant vigilance, where every winter storm tests the limits of preparation and response. Here, the battle is waged not only against an adversary, but against the mountain itself, a mountain that answers to no flag and offers no warning before it closes the road for good. At 2 a.m. on January 3rd, the avalanche struck without warning. 4 men, Captain Ahmad, Naik Abdul Rahman, Lance Naik Shahid Iqbal, and civilian operator Muhammad Ali, were working a heavy snowblower on the upper slopes of Burzil Pass. The machinery, designed for the harshest terrain, was no match for a wall of snow moving at highway speed. Radio logs from the Army's Northern Command record a sudden silence, broken only by static and brief, clipped messages. Avalanche, the biggest Ibanish Burzil top, crew unresponsive. Within half an hour, the Inter-Services Public Relations Desk in Astor was notified. Rescue teams mobilized, but the first reality check came from the meteorological station. Surface winds were holding steady at 68 kilometers per hour, just above the 65 kilometers per hour limit that grounds all helicopter operations. The Mi-18s readied on the tarmac, crews on standby, but the order came down: hold until the wind drops. For the men trapped under the snow, time was measured in body heat and oxygen, not in minutes or hours. On the ground, mountain warfare battalions moved out on foot, fighting through snowdrifts and debris fields. The radio traffic tells a story of mounting frustration, calls for aerial extraction, requests for thermal imaging, repeated denials as gusts battered the landing zone. The rescue window narrowed by the hour. By 4 o'clock, 2 bodies were located. The machinery was overturned, its cab crushed. At 6 o'clock, the helicopters attempted a low pass, but aborted after turbulence rocked the rotors. The wind remained unyielding. As the sun rose, the temperature dropped further. By 8 o'clock, all 3 soldiers were confirmed dead. Muhammad Ali, the civilian operator, was still missing. It would take another 2 hours before ground teams found him, alive but hypothermic, buried under a meter of snow and metal. He had survived 8 hours in the dark, breathing air trapped in the cab. The rescue crews, exhausted and frostbitten, relayed the news up the chain of command. Official statements followed at noon, but the radio logs captured the real story. Every delay, every stalled helicopter, every minute lost to wind and cold. The machines that keep the pass open are only as effective as the weather allows. When the wind crosses 65 kilometers per hour, rescue turns into recovery. In the high Karakoram, survival is often decided by thresholds written into the operational manuals and by the invisible hand of the storm. Night in the Karakoram brings silence, but in the homes of those waiting for news from Burzil Pass, sleep does not come easily. Nazia Gulfam, wife of Captain Ahmad Gulfam, sits in her Lahore apartment, phone clutched in her hand, waiting for a message that will not arrive. In Astor, a mother listens for footsteps on the stairs, hoping her son will return from the mountain. These are the hours that stretch into eternity for families whose lives are tethered to the high passes. By dawn, word spreads through official channels and social media. Names are released: Captain Ahmad Gulfam, Sepoy Muhammad Rizwan, and civilian operator Muhammad Essa. The news is blunt: 3 dead, 1 survivor. The machinery that carried them into the storm is now silent, buried under snow. For the families, every detail matters: the time of the avalanche, the length of the rescue, the impossible winds that kept helicopters grounded. Each fact is a thread in the story they must now carry. Nazia Gulfam speaks softly to a reporter, her voice steady but edged with exhaustion. She describes the final call before Asmad's deployment. He promised he would come home soon. He said the mountain was just another duty. In the days that follow, condolences arrive from every level of government. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif addresses the nation. "We share the deep sorrow of the families of our brave soldiers and the civilian worker who lost their lives. Their sacrifice in the line of duty will never be forgotten." The loss ripples outward, touching not only immediate families but also the wider community. In Gilgit, neighbors gather in small groups, sharing tea and fragments of news. In Lahore, Nazia faces questions from her children about when their father will return. There are no easy answers. The military offers support, but the absence is unfillable. Each family must navigate the aftermath, funerals, paperwork, the slow rearrangement of daily life without a husband, a son, a father. Beyond the headlines, the avalanche exposes the hidden cost of keeping mountain roads open in winter. The men who clear the passes are not anonymous. They are fathers, sons, husbands. Their work is essential, but the danger is constant. For every convoy that makes it through, there are families who wait by the phone, hoping the next call brings good news. In the winter of 2026, the mountains claim more than a strategic route. They claim futures, memories, and the fragile sense of safety that families try to hold on to in the shadow of the peaks. At dawn on January 15th, 2026, Sanu Sherpa led his team out of Makalu's final camp, stepping into a world stripped to bare essentials by winter. The summit push began with the wind already howling above 90 kilometers per hour, gusts lifting snow in sheets across the ridge. Instrument readings logged by the expedition's weather station confirmed what the climbers felt in their bones. The temperature had plunged overnight, dropping from -5 to -12 degrees Celsius in just 6 hours. That 7-degree drop hardened the snowpack underfoot, turning every step into a test of nerve and skill. Jet stream charts from the Nepal Meteorological Department showed a high-altitude river of air running straight across Makalu's upper flanks, pushing wind speed near the summit past the 100 kilometers per hour line. At these velocities, exposed skin freezes in minutes, and even the best down suits offer only partial protection. The wind's force bent tent poles at Camp 4 and tore at the fixed ropes, which had already been stretched thin by earlier storms. Sanu Sherpa, a veteran of more than 150 winter ascents, took the lead on rope planning. He and Phurba Ongel Sherpa checked anchors and replaced carabiners where they could, but time and cold forced hard choices. With the wind threatening to rip ropes from their moorings, the team decided to climb in short, staggered waves, leaving some sections unropped above Camp 3. Each climber carried a personal oxygen system, but the sudden cold caused 2 regulators to freeze, forcing a last-minute switch to emergency bottles. The margin for error shrank to almost nothing. By 10:27 a.m., Sanu and Iranian climber Abul Fazl Ghazali reached the summit, their GPS trackers pinging a location at 8,485 meters. The wind was so loud that radio contact with base camp broke up, leaving the team isolated at the highest point on Earth. The descent would begin with the same wind at their backs, but now the temperature was still falling, and the ropes, already stressed by the morning's gale, offered only a fragile line between survival and disaster. The data from that morning, jet stream overlays, temperature logs, and rope inventory sheets, document how close the expedition came to the edge. In winter on Makalu, every safety margin is written in the language of wind speed, temperature, and time. For Sanu Sherpa's team, the summit was not just a victory over altitude, but a brief foothold on ground that could not be held for long. A fleeting victory. Phurba Ongel Sherpa had weathered dozens of Himalayan expeditions, but in the winter of 2026, experience was no shield against the absence of a fixed rope. The Makalu summit team, battered by exhaustion and cold, began their descent as winds tore at their gear, gusting over 90 kilometers per hour. Above Camp 4, just below 7,500 meters, Phurba reached a stretch where the rope had been removed earlier that day. The team, pressed for time and equipment, had debated whether to risk the exposed traverse or double back. The decision was made in haste, with no margin for error. A memo from Mira Sherpa, Furba's sister, later surfaced. She recounted the team's final radio call. He said the rope was gone. He said, "We have to go down anyway." He sounded tired, but he said not to worry. In the chaos of descent, with numb hands and failing light, Furba slipped. There was no anchor, no backup. He vanished from sight. Sanu Sherpa and Lakpa Rinji found only the wind and a single boot print pressed into the snow. At base camp, Layla Khan, Furba's niece, waited for news. A video call captured her trembling voice as she asked Sanu what happened. He replied, "The rope was not there. We tried to hold him, but it was too late." The footage spread among family and friends, fueling questions in Kathmandu's climbing circles. Who had removed the rope? Why wasn't it replaced when winter protocol demanded a fixed line above Camp 3? Answers dissolved in the harsh logic of high-altitude survival, where every kilogram matters and every minute in the death zone is borrowed. Rescue was impossible. The Nepalese Army helicopter, dispatched within hours, was forced to abort at 7,100 meters by winds topping 80 kilometers per hour and zero visibility. Sanu and the others waited through the night, hoping for a break in the weather that never came. Furba's body was recovered 2 days later, after the wind eased, but the questions about safety and responsibility had already begun. Sherpa guides account for nearly a third of all fatalities on Nepal's highest peaks. The missing rope and failed rescue at Makalu became another entry in a long list of losses, a stark reminder that in the Himalayas, the smallest lapse can cost a life. 8-year-old Mohammed Zubair lay pinned beneath splintered beams and packed snow, the only sound his own ragged breath. The avalanche that struck Sarigale, lower Chitral, on January 24, 2026, buried his family's home in seconds. Neighbors digging through the debris found him hours later, shivering, his eyes wide and silent. 9 members of his family, parents Bacha Khan and Rosia Bibi, 4 sisters, 3 brothers, were lost. Zubair survived, but the world he knew vanished under the weight of a single night's storm. In Chitral's remote valleys, avalanches are not rare, but the scale of this tragedy stunned even seasoned rescue workers. The rescue effort, delayed by blocked roads and continuing snowfall, arrived too late for everyone but Zubair. Local volunteers and Chitral scouts carried bodies through waist-deep snow to the nearest road. The president's declaration of a climate emergency brought media attention, but for those left behind, the grief was private and consuming. Zubair's story is not an isolated one. Regional health records show that nearly 68% of child avalanche survivors in the Hindu Kush Himalaya develop symptoms of PTSD. Nightmares, anxiety, and withdrawal become part of daily life. Without structured counseling, many children struggle to return to school or play. In villages like Sarigale, trauma is carried quietly, woven into the routines of survival. The avalanche's toll, 9 lives lost in a single family, underscores the fragility of mountain life when winter turns violent. For survivors like Zubair, the aftermath is measured not only in the names recited at funerals, but in the long, uncertain road to healing. His voice, when he speaks, is soft. He says, "I remember the cold. I remember calling for my mother. Then, nothing." 12 hours. That is how long it took for rescue teams to reach the avalanche site in Lower Chitral after the storm. The National Disaster Management Authority's report details the sequence. Roads blocked by 62 centimeters of new snow, heavy machinery stalled at choke points, and local volunteers forced to dig by hand. The only route in or out was buried. When the avalanche struck Sarigale, emergency calls went out, but the nearest functioning rescue crew was separated by impassable drifts and a single-lane road choked with snow. NDMA's own assessment bluntly states, "No mechanical access for 12 hours. Aerial drops attempted, but weather non-permissive." This is not an isolated failure. Across the Himalayas, rescue infrastructure is shaped by terrain, budget, and climate. NDMA's annual review lists more than 70% of high-altitude villages in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa as lacking real-time avalanche monitoring. Most rely on word of mouth or basic radio traffic. In Chitral, the only available snowplow was busy clearing the main highway, leaving side valleys exposed. NDMA highlights a systemic gap. Heavy snowfall events now exceed historic norms, but road clearance capacity remains unchanged since 2015. Climate volatility has outpaced the systems meant to protect those in its path. In the days after the avalanche, officials cited the 62-centimeter snow spike as a rare event, but NDMA's own data shows such accumulations are becoming more common. The 12-hour delay was not just a logistical setback, it was the difference between rescue and recovery. Families in Serigal waited through the night, knowing help was close, but not close enough. The snow, the blocked road, and the absence of early warning systems turned a natural hazard into a lasting tragedy. Shah Daulat was 31, a son of Shimshal, and already a legend among Pakistan's high-altitude climbers. He had stood on the summits of K2, Nanga Parbat, Gasher Brahmdorn II, routes that few in his generation had survived. But on February 7th, 2026, Shah was not chasing a record or guiding a client up a famous peak. He was leading a training climb on a frozen wall above Gojal, Hunza, preparing a group of young climbers for the season ahead. The wind that day, measured by the Indian Meteorological Department, reached 71 kilometers per hour. In these mountains, wind at that speed strips warmth from the body and scours the snowpack to glass. The training was meant to be routine, a test of ice anchors, rope work, and judgment under pressure. But as the group moved higher, their GPS units began to fail, losing signal in the swirling gusts. At 2,900 meters, Shah paused to check the route, radioing a brief update to base. Minutes later, a slab of wind-loaded snow gave way beneath his feet. He fell nearly 400 meters down the ice face, vanishing from view. There was no chance to self-arrest, no warning, only the sound of wind and the sudden absence of a leader. For 6 hours, the team tried to reach him, hampered by deep drifts and the loss of their only working GPS. The rescue was delayed further by the same winds that had destabilized the slope, making helicopter support impossible. By the time local volunteers reached the base of the wall, Shah's body had been buried by fresh snow. The news traveled quickly through the mountaineering community. Samina Baig, Pakistan's most celebrated female climber and a friend of Shah's, issued a statement of mourning. He was the hope of our mountains. His loss is a wound that will not heal. Shah Daulat's death was not the result of ambition or recklessness, but of the thin line that separates routine from catastrophe in the high Himalaya. Training at altitude is a rite of passage for young climbers in Pakistan, a necessity in a region where formal schools are rare and skills are passed from mentor to student on the mountain itself. Yet the risks are amplified by climate volatility, unpredictable wind, unstable snow, and the ever-present threat of losing contact with the outside world. In the aftermath, the community gathered in Shimshal to bury one of its own, mourning a future cut short by a storm no one could see coming. Shah's story is echoed in every village that sends its youth to the heights, chasing dreams that the mountain may not return. 14 deaths on Nepal's 8,000ers each year. That is the figure Rama Tamang, a senior climbing permit officer, repeats every winter, never as a warning, always as a fact. In the last decade, more than a third of those lost have been Sherpa guides or porters. The Himalayan database, tracking every summit and every fatality since 1922, lists 339 deaths on Everest alone. Of those, 115 were Nepali workers, men and women whose names rarely appear in international headlines, but who make every expedition possible. The economics are as stark as the body count. The average Sherpa household earns about $3,200 a year, according to a 2023 survey by the Central Bureau of Statistics. For many, that sum represents a full season's risk on the mountain. Guides like Furba Ongel Sherpa step into the death zone, not for glory, but to keep families afloat. Each year, the cost of living in the Khumbu Valley creeps higher, while the price paid for a single summit attempt, sometimes a life, sometimes a limb, remains unchanged. permit numbers tell their own story. Since 2020, Nepal's Ministry of Tourism has issued 30% more climbing permits for winter and shoulder seasons. The surge is driven by global demand for high-altitude adventure, but the supply of experienced guides is finite. The ratio of clients to Sherpa workers has widened, forcing crews to take on more assignments with less margin for error. The risk is not only personal, it is structural, built into the economics of Himalayan mountaineering. Dr. Helen Miller, a disaster risk researcher, points to the rising hazard index, a 15% increase in avalanche and exposure risk across the region since 2010. She calls it systemic failure of adaptation. The mountains are getting more dangerous, but the systems meant to protect climbers and workers have not kept pace. In her words, we are asking the same people to do more, with less, in a world that is changing faster than anyone can prepare for. These numbers are not just statistics. They are the silent ledger behind every headline, every summit photo, every obituary. When a permit is issued, when a guide signs on for another season, the calculation is not abstract. It is measured in lives, in dollars, in the quiet arithmetic of risk and reward. As winter storms grow harsher and commercial teams push deeper into the season, the cost is paid by those whose livelihoods depend on the mountain, and by families who wait for news that may never come. In the aftermath of the 2026 Himalayan tragedies, the question is no longer whether change is needed, but how urgently it must come. Dr. Laura Miller, a disaster risk specialist, has outlined a framework that moves beyond commiseration to concrete action. A blueprint built from the lessons written in Snow and Loss. Her call is clear. The cycle of preventable deaths will not be broken by tradition or hope alone. First, she points to the need for real-time avalanche monitoring across all high-risk corridors, from Burzil Pass to the remote valleys of Chitral. The absence of automated sensors and digital alert systems left entire communities and crews exposed this winter. Miller's model draws on the proven impact of acoustic and telemetry-based warning networks, already used in parts of the Alps and Rockies. Networks that could be adapted for Himalayan terrain if the will and funding align. She urges both governments and private operators to prioritize these installations, arguing that every hour gained in early warning is a life preserved. Rescue infrastructure is the next frontier. The winter's failures, grounded helicopters, blocked roads, and isolated villages underscore the limits of current capacity. Miller advocates for a regional upgrade of helicopter fleets, with aircraft specifically rated for high-altitude, low-visibility operations. She calls for joint investment from military, civil, and commercial climbing sectors, noting that the same helicopters that rescue soldiers can evacuate villagers and climbers alike. Training for rapid deployment and cross-border cooperation between Nepal, Pakistan, and India is not just ideal but necessary, given how storms and avalanches ignore national boundaries. Commercial expeditions face a reckoning of their own. Miller's recommendations include a strict quota on winter and shoulder season permits, enforced by both Nepal's Ministry of Tourism and Pakistan's Alpine Club. She pushes for mandatory guide-to-client ratios and continuous rope-fixing protocols, especially above 6,000 meters. These measures, she asserts, can reduce the pressure on Sherpa and local guides, whose labor underpins every summit but whose losses are too often accepted as collateral. Finally, Miller calls for a climate adaptation push that matches the scale of the threat. She proposes a regional climate resilience fund, supporting everything from snow science research to the retrofitting of high-altitude homes and roadways. In her words, we are living in the aftermath of yesterday's weather, but we must prepare for tomorrow's storms. The time for incremental reforms has passed. The 2026 season has shown that without systemic change, better monitoring, stronger rescue, smarter regulation, and climate readiness, the mountains will continue to claim those who live, work, and dream in their shadow. Miller's framework is not a guarantee of safety, but it is a refusal to accept loss as inevitable. Today, families mourn Furba Ongel Sherpa, Abul Fazl Gojali, Shah Daulat, and the Chitral villagers, names now etched into the cost of human ambition. As climate volatility, economic pressure, and commercial expeditions intensify, the risks in these mountains only deepen. Each season, new teams arrive, but rescue remains limited and the mountains remain unmoved. In the Himalayas, survival is never guaranteed. Only the consequences are. Join the conversation below if these stories moved you.